Okay, so to make this, I'm going to start with a new empty canvas. I'm going to go new file here in the top left. And what I want to do is make a 4x5 inch canvas. So 4 inches wide by 5 inches tall. And the resolution, at least 300 is a good size if you ever intend to print what you're making. If I'm working on something that I'm doing to print and reproduce, I would actually be working probably much bigger than this, but that's not what we're doing right now. Usually RGB is what you want. RGB is meant for displays, and then CMYK is when you're printing, but that's a different thing. And the default color profile is usually fine too. So I'm gonna hit create. And now I have a canvas. We kind of didn't talk about this, but left-hand side is our mouse tools. Right-hand side are our adjustment layers and our layers themselves. Up in the middle here is our tool options bar that is dynamic, changes based on which tool you have. So if I grab the type tool, then I will have my font style and size and things like that. If I grab a paintbrush, I will see my brush styles and the opacity and other settings. To choose your colors, you actually do it in the very bottom here. Right now I'm painting with pink. Boop, boop, boop. Pretty good. All right, so what I want to do is recreate. Oh, where'd they go? There it is. I want to recreate this car loading screen. And what I'm going to do, which is kind of defeating the point of starting with this, but I'm going to open it right next to this image so that I can reference the colors better. So I'm just going to grab my crop tool, which is how you can cut out unwanted parts of your entire canvas or extend your canvas out. And I'm just going to make it even bigger so that there's room for both. All right. So, and then I'll just crop it back in when I'm done. So let's go ahead and put my reference image here. And what I'm going to do is delete the parts I don't need to see. So I'm going to grab this marquee tool that creates rectangular selections. I'm going to select this unwanted part. And I'm just going to press delete. Ooh, look at this. This is a smart object. I need to rasterize it. Right click, rasterize, delete. Okay, that was a destructive edit and it doesn't matter because it's just a reference image for me. Usually I would do this on a separate open file and I just have it on my other screen, but you guys can't see all my screens. Okay, so if we look at this, we have a vehicle, a road, some dunes, and a retro sun, and then a gradient behind there. So let's put the road in here first, and then the dunes, we'll build the background, and we'll do the car last. And again, this will be up on the resource page probably by the end of the week. All right, I have several roads here and my cute little robot. I'm gonna use this first road. I think it works the best. And I got all these images on Adobe stock. I was just kind of, Ziv was with me and I was like, I don't know, let's do something else. And I think the longest, hardest part of this project was finding all the assets on Adobe stock because you can kind of doom scroll on there. Okay, I'm gonna drop road 1 in here. And I think what I need to do, it's going the wrong way. So I'm gonna right click, flip horizontal. And I'm gonna put it, I'm creating a problem for myself. Oh well, I'm gonna put it about like this. That's fine. And make it within there. Having my reference files causing me grief, but oh well. Maybe shrink it down. And my goal is not to make it exactly the same, but might as well try and get close. Okay, now what I wanna do is remove the sky because it's not what I want. And there are many ways of doing that. I think this is a pretty good one to try remove background on. Let's see what happens. Could not find background. Oh no, so sad. Let's select subject. Could not find a subject. Aw, man. Okay, let's use the object selection tool and just click and drag over the road and the barricade. All right, pretty good. I think my bigger canvas caused some confusion for things. So I made my selection, and to isolate it, I'm going to hit this mask button right here. When you mask it, the marching ants go away because we put a mask there. Now what I'd like to do is put the dunes back there. So I'm gonna go back to my project files. I have an image called dunes, very duney. I'm gonna drop it on here and probably make them smaller. The sun's the opposite direction. If I want to find, I can right click and flip horizontal again. It's kind of up to whoever's making it what they'd like to do. And I wonder what'll happen if I try remove background again. That was pretty good. It did some weirdness here. I don't know if you can see that it created this empty gap on there. So I can grab my paintbrush, make sure I'm on the mask, and paint with white to bring back that part of the dunes. And over here as well. My mouse is so big. Okay. Now I want to use my layer order to my advantage. I've watched some people use Photoshop and try and make a jigsaw puzzle where they try and cut out the base of the dunes to match up perfectly with the barricade of the street in front. But why not just put the dune layer underneath the road layer? So always think about that when you're working to minimize how much selecting you need to do. At this point, I've started doing quite a bit. I should take a moment to save my file. So I'm gonna go File and Save. And you can save to the cloud. I'm not doing that right now. I'm gonna save to my computer. I'll name it Dune Robot. And I'm just gonna put it on my desktop for now. When you are saving a project that you're working on, almost always you will want the format to be Photoshop. And then towards the end, I'll talk about saving smaller flattened file versions of this. So I'll hit save, and great. Now what I'd like to do is this background layer, which I'm gonna name, instead of layer 0, I'm gonna name it background. I'm gonna put what's called a gradient on there, because if we look at the reference image, it is gradually changing from, gosh, I don't know, magenta to violet. Or an orange pink to a purple. So I want to recreate that same gradient. And we're going to look at something new here called a layer effect. And if we look at the bottom of our layers, there's a key, there's a button that says FX, and that's where our layer effects live, right next to, or layer style, excuse me, next to the layer mask button. You can also just double click the empty space next to your layer's name, and it will open up the layer style menu. And what I want is a gradient overlay. Color overlay. Oops, I have bad aim. There's my gradient overlay. And right now I have a gradient that's going from pink to orange, salmon, I don't know. And my gradients have adjustments I can make. I can lower the opacity, I can change the direction. There's a lot of things I can do. But what I want to do is go and edit the colors of my gradient first, which I do by clicking on this little bar. And you can see it's going from kind of orange to a neon pink. So if I click on orange here, and then I go to color, I can click that and my color picker comes up. And this is probably the main reason I had this reference image, is if I move my mouse outside that window, I get this eyedropper, which lets me pick any color on my canvas. So I'm gonna click this purple. Pretty good. And then I'll click OK. I'll go to the pink and I'll click color again. And this time I'll click at the bottom of this, which might not be the right color, maybe more like this. Yeah, that's pretty good. And then I'll click OK and OK again. And now what I might do is change the scale, which makes the gradient less gradual or more gradual. I can also actually click on, and I don't know if anyone else experiences this, but sometimes If I try and click on my gradient and pull it up or down, it doesn't work. My only fix is to click on my desktop and then back on here, and then I can click and move it around. This has been a bug for years now. Maybe here and scale it down a little. We're not going to try and perfectly recreate it because that would take too much time and we wouldn't learn a lot more from that. So my background looks pretty good. I'm going to put my ellipse on here. So we're going to use another new tool. So we already selected, transformed, and masked the road and the dunes. We'll do it one more time with the car. Any questions so far? Anything we'd like to see again? I am going to do a gradient overlay again with the ellipse. Okay, great. Hopefully everyone can still hear me and my internet's not being weird. So I'm going to go to these ellipses at the bottom of my toolbar. And I'm going to click and hold and find the ellipse tool. And what this does is just let you create actually a vector shape. So if I click and drag, I can create an ellipse. And if I want this ellipse to be a perfect circle, I hold Shift on the keyboard, and now it is constrained to a circle. And I'll go ahead and stretch that out. I'm going to look at my settings up here. It's filling with white, and it has a black outline, a black stroke. I'm going to turn the stroke off. I'm going to grab my move tool and move it here in the center. And then what I'll do is go back and add a layer style to give it that gradient effect. And then we are going to do some masking to cut out little lines from it. So I'll go and double click on the empty space, and I'm going to do gradient overlay. Now it looks kind of cool like that, but it kind of disappeared in there because it put the last gradient that it remembers. So now I'll go back to the gradient bar. Where it is purple, I will choose that orange. Pretty good. And where it is pink, maybe it's the same pink already. But let's go ahead and just click for safety. Okay, it pretty much was. So now I probably reduce the scale a little bit. Actually, maybe just drag it up a little. Click on my desktop. Okay, that's pretty good. And I'll click OK. Oh, I forgot something. If you look at the ellipse, it has an outer glow, a pinkish outer glow. So let's add that. Okay, let's go back. I'm going to double click in the empty space again. And I'm going to go to outer glow. And what I want you to notice is that I'm clicking the word outer glow, not the checkbox next to it, because if you hit the checkbox, it doesn't take you into the menu for it. So outer glow. This is already set to that kind of pinkish color. I'm going to make it bigger. And maybe turn the opacity down a little bit. And that's pretty good. All right. The last thing I need to do is mask out those little retro design bars and actually blur it a little bit. So this is going to be a little flip on what we did. I'm going to put a mask on there first. So I'm going to click that mask button. And I'm going to grab my marquee tool that we saw earlier. And basically, I'm just going to draw these bars and then paint with black in them. So if I want to draw multiple bars, I can draw the first one. And I'm not going to do this perfectly. And then if I hold Shift, I can continue adding bars. And another little trick that I'm doing is when I draw my bar and if it's not where I want it, I haven't let go of Shift, I haven't let go of my mouse, but if I hold spacebar, I can move what I drew somewhere else. And I'm just gonna do 4 of them. So hopefully that wasn't too wacky to watch. Okay, so if you see, I have these 4 selections now. And just to be safe, okay. Now I'm going to fill this with black. And the easier thing to do is to go edit, fill, and to tell it to use black. Now, before I hit OK, you should see that I'm on my mask for that ellipse, and that mask is completely white. When I hit OK, the mask now has these black bars on it. I'm gonna press Command or Control D to deselect. I'm gonna hold Alt or Option, and this is what Photoshop is seeing. Okay, now I'm gonna go ahead and blur this. And I'm gonna go Filter, Blur, and I'm just gonna use Gaussian blur, which that's way too much. Maybe do it. Maybe just like 0.8 pixels. That's pretty good. It seems like I could do more and I could line up the gradients better, but not right now. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and crop this so we're not seeing the other image anymore. So I'm gonna hit my crop tool, choose 4x5, and just move this over here. That way we can see what we've been making. Okay, let's put our little robot friend in there. I'm going to find the robot 1. I'm gonna drop him on there. I'm just gonna hit enter and move it to the top first. And I'm gonna hit free transform again, Command or Control T. Shrink him down, needs to be right clicked and flipped horizontal. And he's probably gonna be about right there. Pretty cute. Maybe a little smaller, they're not that big. Okay. When I'm done transforming, I hit the check mark. And maybe I'll try remove background again. Why not? That's pretty good. If we look, he's got kind of some white edges around his wheels. So maybe we'll go and try and clean that up a tiny bit. The way I like to do that is to double click on the mask. And that takes me into what's called select and mask. And then you can do something like shift the edge in. And if you want, you can add a little contrast and a little bit of smoothing. And this is something you're gonna want to experiment with. It can get a little hairy fast, but I'm just gonna shift it in a little. That's pretty good. And I'll click OK. And now my little robot's here. I have 3 things left to do. I want to put a shadow under him or it. I want to put a gradient map to get that whole kind of wild color scheme that it had. Put a texture on it, and then we'll save it out. All right, let's see here. So there are quite a few ways to make a shadow under something. I'm just gonna do something that we already did, which was to make an ellipse and to blur it. So I'm gonna switch back to my ellipse tool, and I can actually just press L on the keyboard. No, I can't. I can press E. God, I'm forgetting everything. U on the keyboard, and it will switch to the ellipse tool. And I'm just gonna make a little blob like this, rotate it, and maybe resize it. Maybe I didn't rotate it enough. Too much. And I'm gonna make the fill black. Okay. And then I'll go filter, blur, Gaussian. It's gonna ask me if I wanna make it a smart object. That's fine. I could also rasterize it, and then I'll just blur it quite a bit. There it goes. Maybe that was too much. There we go. And I can also take the opacity down maybe to like 78. My layer order is wrong here. The shadow should be underneath the robot. And I'll grab my move tool, move it over. And then I'm going to duplicate it. So I'm going to hold Alt or Option and move it under the tire, press Command or Control T, and shrink it down so that it's under each tire. Where did that go? Yeah, that's pretty. Probably got too blurry. That's okay. And then I'll just duplicate it under each one. Oops. Gotta be careful with your clicking. And then if I wanted to do more, I could just grab a new layer, grab a paintbrush, and paint with black. This is going to be kind of hard for me with my weird brush size, but I paint with a brush with the hardness setting pretty low, like 30, and the opacity also low, about 50. And that just lets me paint these little subtle lines. Maybe hardness to 0. That's pretty okay. And opacity a little lower. So I can go and kind of paint with black in parts that, man, this is hard to do with a strange brush thing. But you could go and kind of basically burn and dodge it yourself. The shortcut to duplicate something, I like that question. My move tool is set to auto select, so it will duplicate whichever layer I click and drag from. So if I hold Alt or Option while on the move tool and I click and drag on a layer, I can make a copy. And while we're at it, I haven't saved in a while. I'm going to press Command or Control S. And if I look at my layers, they're starting to get a little wacky. I'm going to go ahead and put my robot and its shadows all into one group. So I clicked on the bottom ellipse, went to the very top, because that's that layer 1 is where I painted shadows. And I'm going to press Command or Control G. And I'll name this robot. So this folder is everything with the robot. 2 more things, and then we're done. We're gonna put a gradient map on here, and what a gradient map does, if we look at the original, it takes and it puts a color filter. It maps colors to certain levels of brightness on an image. So in this case, this image is mapping pink onto the highlights, and it looks like orange onto the lowlights. I might have reversed that, but let's just check it out. So let's go to our adjustment layers. If you don't see these, you can go to Window, Adjustments, and I'm gonna go to the very bottom. Oh no, it's not there. Where is it? I'm blind. There it is. Gradient map is usually at the very bottom. And when I click that, it maps those colors to any layer underneath it. If you look at my layers, I have a black and white gradient mapping to every layer underneath it. So what it's saying is the darkest parts turn black, the brightest parts turn white, and everything in between is a certain level of gray. If I hit reverse, you might get a better idea of what's happening. Now the darkest parts become white, the brightest parts become black, and vice versa. So with that kind of in our minds, let's click on this gradient and let's click on the black dot, go to color. And I think it was like this purplish thing. I could be wrong, but let's just go ahead and map it like that. And then I'll go to the white, the highlights, and we'll put kind of pinkish. Yeah, that's pretty good. And then I'll click OK. And generally speaking, a gradient map is a tool to kind of unify your composite, because there were different levels of quality, different temperatures, kind of different contrasts, and this came and helped me out a little bit. And then what I do, I think overlay is what I want. Let's see. It's pretty good. So if you look at a layer, when this gradient map is set to normal, it is mapping at 100% opacity onto all the pixels. But I can actually go and make the gradient map blend with those pixels instead with what's called a blend mode. And here it says it's blending normal. If I go to dissolve, nothing happens. Darken, it blends in a way where it adds contrast and makes the image darker. Multiply is a more intense version of that, and so forth. So then we have lighten blend modes that become more intense as you scroll down. And then we have overlay ones. And generally what you'll do is pick one that kind of works. I think pin light might be working. And then you can also modify it with your opacity. So I'll click pin light, and then I'll go to opacity, and maybe pull that down a little bit. And then another thing that I would do is put a texture on top of all of this that kind of makes it look a little more real when we add some imperfectness to an image. I also might have liked to increase the contrast of all of this. Maybe we'll go ahead and do that. Let me think about this. If I let's just hit brightness contrast, and I pull this up, that kind of works. So I added a brightness contrast adjustment layer, and I just slid the contrast slider up to kind of give it more of that intense shadows that the original image has. I'd probably rather do it with curves, but that's okay. So the final thing is the texture. I'm going to save again, Command or Control S, and I'm going to drop in this file called texture, which is literally just noise, like white static or white noise, and drop it in, rotate it. I'm holding shift so it rotates in 15-degree increments. Make it bigger than my image. And then what I'll do is use a blend mode. Let's go ahead. Well, it's fine if it's getting, no, let's put it above the gradient map. And I think did I use overlay? Sorry, my brain is getting, let's try soft light, and let's take the opacity way down to like 30%. So it's just giving it a little bit of grit. And it is user's choice how you want to do this. So now I would save one more time, Command or Control S. And let's say I'm ready to send this to my mom because I made it for her and I'm going to email it to her. I don't want to send her a giant Photoshop file. I want to send her a JPEG that, you know, any device can open. Your smart fridge can open JPEGs just fine. So the best way is to go File, Export, and Export As. This is making a copy of your file. So here you can choose your format, JPEG, PNG, or GIF, or GIF, whatever you want to call it. JPEG is generally what we use for pixel-based images. PNG is for if you want to preserve transparencies or if it's more of a graphic-heavy project. You can resize it if you want to do that. And you can also adjust the quality. Honestly, 6, if you're only saving it once, is fine. Every time you save a JPEG, it compresses it again. That's why files that are shared on the internet over and over turn into kind of blurry messes. And then when I click export, it asks me where I'd like to save it. And I'll just put it on the desktop as well so that we can compare file sizes. So if we look at my desktop, I have DuneRobot.psd, 67 megabytes, DuneRobot.jpg, 600 kilobytes. Is that 100 times bigger or 10? Someone help me with the math. I think 10 would be 6 megabytes, 6.4, and 100 would be 64. So you get a much smaller file that looks identical. I'm cycling between the two, and the on my screen, you probably can't tell on yours, but the noise is a little less sharp on the JPEG. So if I had shaken the size up, it would have worked even nicer. But that's everything I wanted to share with you today. I will put this up on the resource page with some how-tos. Thank you so much for your time and for joining us and for your questions. At this point, you are, welcome to go on with your day. We're done a little sooner because we have time for questions. But if there's anything you'd like to talk about, you'd like to see, then we're here for you.